Okay, let's jump straight into this explainer. Artificial intelligence is moving at an absolutely blistering pace right now, and honestly, traditional science is really struggling to keep up. Today, we're going to be looking at a surprising, almost counterintuitive premise. We're diving into the methodology of Levent Bulut, a researcher and system theorist. Specifically, we're going to unpack exactly why a researcher who has built this highly developed, incredibly precise AI methodology actively and deliberately bypasses traditional peer-reviewed journals. I mean, in the scientific world, getting published in a journal is the gold standard, right? So why on earth would you walk away from it?
And this is the unspoken question Bulut gets all the time. People look at his work and they think, wait a minute, you have a massive 500-scene annotated dataset. You've got a sophisticated rule-based detector. You even have a thoroughly pre-registered testing protocol. So why isn't this locked behind the prestigious walls of a peer-reviewed journal? It's a totally fair question. But when you actually unpack his answer, it reveals a whole lot about the fundamental nature of modern research, especially when you're dealing with tech that evolves this quickly.
So here is how we're going to break this all down today. 1. The peer review question. 2. Defining objective projection. 3. Built for independent validation. 4. The speed of LLMs. And finally, number 5, radical openness and transparency.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the peer review question. Let's just tackle the elephant in the room right away. Bulut doesn't mince words here. He states his position incredibly plainly, saying the journal route was never the right fit. Choosing the open route was a decision, not a fallback. I really want to emphasize that last part. This wasn't some situation where he got rejected by a journal and just settled for open publishing. No, he argues that open science is fundamentally a far superior choice for this very specific type of foundational framework. But to really grasp why traditional journals are such a bad fit, we first have to understand what exactly he's trying to prove.
Which leads us nicely right into Section 2, defining objective projection.
So, what is his theory actually claiming? Well, objective projection is a falsifiable claim. It basically states that a very specific, defined matrix of physical and sensory variables in a text raises the statistical probability of a convergent autonomic response across readers. Now, that's a mouthful, but notice how heavily that focuses on statistical probability rather than, rigid 100% determinism. This is a very deliberate choice on his part. It's built this way because individual variation among human readers is a very real thing, and it absolutely has to be accounted for. He's not saying every single person is going to react identically. He's claiming that the probability of a shared involuntary physical reaction goes up.
And figuring out how to measure that brings us to Section 3, built for independent validation. Think about it. If you're making a claim about how human autonomic nervous systems react, how do you actually test that fairly? Bulut is the very first person to admit that self-measured validation carries absolutely zero evidential weight. And honestly, it shouldn't. Testing your own theory on yourself is inherently biased. Instead, what we need is independent validation. That's why he created his OPCT v2.0 protocol, which is designed exclusively for outside researchers to use. A massive claim like objective projection literally means nothing if someone else can't independently verify it.
So to completely strip out any of that personal bias, the entire testing instrument is locked in advance. Independent researchers have to run these highly rigorous physical tests using things like ECGs to track heart rate, galvanic skin response, or GSR, to measure sweat gland activity, and pupillometry to track eye dilation. And here is the kicker. Because the entire framework is published beforehand, there is zero room for the creator to retroactively tweak the targets after they've seen the data. The rules are locked in from day one.
I think Bulut captures this dynamic beautifully in this quote. The map is drawn and the instrument is laid out on the table. It now needs other people's hands to take the readings. It's a fantastic analogy, right? It perfectly explains the gap between his work and traditional academic publishing. You see, journals exist to validate a finished, polished result. But this methodology isn't a finished result yet. It's an open, highly tuned instrument just sitting there waiting for replication by others. A closed, secretive review cycle just doesn't work for an open instrument like this.
Okay. Let's move on to Section 4, the speed of LLMs.
This builds into what is probably the single most pressing logistical nightmare in AI research right now. The systems this methodology studies, large language models, they evolve and change on the order of weeks. Literally, week 1, you have a solid baseline. But a traditional journal review cycle, that might take 52 weeks, a full year to clear. For a subject moving this fast, a 1-year delay isn't just inconvenient, it's fatal. By the time the peer review actually clears, the object you were studying has completely moved on. Putting the work out in the open, under a license that lets anybody audit it immediately, is literally the only way to keep the research in step with a blistering pace of the technology itself.
And that brings us to our final section, radical openness and transparency.
It's one thing to just say you work in the open, but it's a whole other thing to actually build the infrastructure to support it. Bulut maintains a completely open archive infrastructure. There is no hidden proprietary pro version kept behind closed doors. The complete corpus index is right there on his site. The primary dataset lives entirely in the open on Hugging Face, with a permanent archival mirror locked in on Zenodo. The validation protocol itself is fully registered on the Open Science Framework. Everything is openly licensed. The door is just wide open for anyone, students, independent scientists, even those journal researchers, to immediately inspect, audit, or actively try to falsify the data.
And what's really cool is that this radical transparency extends to the project's flaws too. True honesty means being upfront about your limitations. So Bulut explicitly outlines what is merely a hypothetical mechanism, like the claim that an LLM penalizes withheld labels internally. And he clearly lists the known operational issues right next to it, like the dimensional consistency problem within narrative entropy. He puts these uncertainties right out there on the surface, instead of papering over them or pretending it's all settled science. Basically, he'd rather point out the limits himself than wait for someone else to find them.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to draw your attention to this final quote. Truth has an objective projection. We are merely the narrative engineers who trace it. By stepping completely outside the slow, closed loop of traditional peer review, Bulut is essentially betting that collective, rapid, independent scrutiny is the absolute best way to trace that truth. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. In an era of rapidly changing AI where these models are evolving in a matter of weeks, is radical, open, independent replication just an alternative, or is it the only way we can actually trace the truth? Thanks so much for learning with me today.